Hi, I'm Cynthia McDermott. I'm an emeritus faculty member from Antioch University, and I want to talk a little bit about a teaching approach that started more than 50 years ago in Georgia. That approach is called Foxfire, and it was begun by a very interesting fellow named Eliot Wigington, who moved to Raven Gap, Georgia in 1966 and started teaching English to a high school there. And he discovered that many of his students were not very engaged with what he was doing. Not an unusual thing for many of us to say in our profession. And so he went to the children and said, what's wrong? What can we do? What should we move forward with? And the young people eventually, and Wig, as he was nicknamed, was very patient and spent time eliciting from the young people what they might be interested in studying. And what came from that is what we have now called cultural journalism. He encouraged the kids with tape recorders and notepads to go out into the community and interview all of the seniors, all the people in the community who had these amazing skills, how to dress a hog, how to build a log cabin, how to build a still. And what happened as a result of that is that the young people began to understand the worth that the community brought to them from a cultural perspective. Well, where did it go from there? Well, the young people started writing magazines. Those Foxfire magazines are still being produced. They did all the work, they did all the writing, they did all the editing, and those magazines eventually got turned into the Foxfire books, many of which you've probably seen on the bookshelves. And then lots of teachers said to Wig, we want to do this. How do we do this? How do we do project-based, student-centered work? And so what began from that was the teacher networks. And across the country, as people would take a Foxfire class on what's called the land, which is down in Raven Gap, Georgia, and they would go back into their schools and start to implement what has become called the Foxfire Approach. There are core practices connected to that approach. I would recommend that you not go up on the Foxfire Foundation page and look at the core practices because they have become modernized and are much more geared toward a much more standardized approach to things. But the original core practices, which have been gleaned and rewritten, etc., with many, many teachers, are perfect ways of looking at the classroom. So where did the term Foxfire come from? Well, if you know anything about that part of Georgia, it is mountainous. It has a wonderful rainforest, one of the few rainforests in the country. And when a tree dies and starts to die and become covered with fungus, etc., there is this process that's called foxfire. And when those old rotten logs are touched, there's a phosphorescent bloom that comes from them. That is actually called foxfire. And what the kids were saying is that finding out about all this magic, all the wonder, all the fabulous skill set in their community made them proud, gave them the opportunity to see themselves as viable members of their community. And those projects and those magazines ended up making Foxfire available over a long area in the world, in the country. With the networks, we have international people doing Foxfire. And the goal of it is respecting young people's needs for what they want to learn and respecting and listening to them to help them determine what's important and necessary rather than standardization, memorization, an adultist perspective where the teacher tells them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And Foxfire, as a result of that, has helped many teachers and many young people see themselves as learners in a very different way than what many of us have experienced, perhaps in our own educational experience. So I would urge you, if you're interested, to spend a little time with some of the writing that's out there. As I said, 1966 is when Foxfire was started by Wig, and it's still going on, not as strong as it was because our whole progressive movement across the country, I think, has weakened significantly. And it's worthwhile if you want to think about ways to have young people make decisions for themselves, become active learners, understand their cultural heritage, and see themselves as engaged learners. So I would recommend the Foxfire approach to anyone who wants to have more fun, more engagement, more enjoyment, and to support a democratic practice in the classroom.